My suggestion is to invite one of the biker gangs to be present in numbers at Cronulla Railway Station when these Lebanese thugs arrive. Australians old and new shouldn't have to put up with this scum.
Probably the best broadcaster the country's ever seen. I love him or hate him.
Here she is. White. Do you want a joke?
Oh, yes.
Okay, start with a joke. How do you put the cork back in a champagne bottle? How do you put
You can't.
He is just a force of nature. And yes, he's bombastic. He'll harangue, prime ministers, businessmen, you name it. Alan Jones will be in there taking absolutely no prisoners. But the reality is that, in recent years, his power, his influence has waned. But I don't think you can take away from, the force that he's been over the last 30 years. A lot of our younger listeners may have difficulty just grasping, the kind of power that he wielded, especially today in the age of social media. Before Alan Jones came along, that early morning breakfast slot had been very much, it was the weather, it was, telling people the time, telling people what was coming up, during the day. It was a cheerful kind of round, that early morning radio shift. And Jones just turned that around and made it into a really serious, I will break your neck kind of style of radio. And he took politicians to task, and people responded to that. I mean, there was for a long time, I think there was a kind of sneery kind of thing that some people in Sydney had that, it was only tradies and taxi drivers who were listening to Jones. But that just was not true. The people who influenced what happens in Sydney were not just going on his radio station, they were asking him for advice, sometimes on air, but often behind the scenes. And even if they weren't asking for his advice, Jones was telling them what he wanted them to do.
We don't want to see you, we don't want to hear you. Climb into a chaff bag.
Every person in the caucus of the Labor Party knows that Julia Gillard's a liar. The old man doesn't really know, he was going to jail.
She's a clown, Jacinda Ardern, a complete clown. I just wonder whether Scott Morrison's going to be fully briefed to shove a sock down the throat. I mean, she is a joke, this woman, an absolute and utter lightweight.
There's no question that there has been a lot of misogyny in the kinds of things that Jones has said over the years. And I think when he made that comment about Ardern, it sort of coalesced. There were a lot of things happening at the time as well. It wasn't just that this was a reminder of, those things that he'd said, the quite disgraceful things sometimes about women. It was also right at the point where listeners were already starting to abandon the show, but more importantly, advertisers were starting to abandon the show, and not just abandon the show, abandoned 2GB as a station, as a radio station. So you had all this background where Jones his influence is fading because he's a dinosaur and he's not reading the room. Other broadcasters are moving with the times. Jones just doesn't seem to be able to do that. He's really stuck on certain lines, and maybe you could get away with that and your audience would just, dwindle a bit, but you'd hang around. But when you're saying stuff like, chuff bag and chuck 'em in the sea, advertisers will abandon you, and that's what they were doing.